It's a unique time. The country under lockdown, an economic crisis that we haven't known for generations. Like, why should people care about remembrance?
Well, I think the most important thing about it is that it's about honouring those who gave their lives in the service of our country. And of course they did that to protect our way of life and our freedom. And I think it would be very dangerous if we forgot that. Not least, I think, because you know, we need to hang on to that idea of democracy.
Why is that dangerous if we don't remember the sacrifice of the past?
Well, because I think that what we will also forget is the true horror of war. And if you forget about the horror of war, then the great risk, I think, is that people might think that going to war is a reasonable thing to do. Now, in certain circumstances, that might be the case, but of course you need to understand what you're taking on when you do it, because it's always visceral, it's always violent, it's always brutal, and ultimately it leads to people having to sacrifice their lives in the cause, and that's quite a thing for people to do. So we need to remember that, we need to learn from it, and we need to make sure that people only take us to war when they absolutely have to.
And like looking at history, history tells us that economic crises lead to security crises. How worried are you that the global economic crisis brought on by coronavirus could lead to new security threats, potentially even war?
Yes, I mean, I think we're living at a moment in time where the world is a very uncertain and anxious place. And of course, the dynamic of global competition is a feature of our lives as well. And I think the real risk we have with quite a lot of the regional conflicts that are going on at the moment is you could see escalation lead to miscalculation. And that's the thing I think we have to guard against.
Miscalculation, can you just spell that out in easy language? What does that mean?
So what that means is that the protagonists, either because they don't realise the implications of their actions, lead to an escalation, which means that more people perhaps get involved, more weaponry gets involved, and before you can contain it, it leads to the sides ending up in a full-blown war. And if that happens, as we saw in the last century, I mean, we have to remember history might not repeat itself, but it has a rhythm. And if you look back at the last century, before both world wars, I think it was unarguable that there was escalation that led to the miscalculation, which ultimately led to war at a scale we would hopefully never see again.
So are you saying that's a real threat, that there could be another world war?
I'm saying it's a risk, and I think we need to be conscious of those risks. And that's why remembrance matters, because if you look back at history, hopefully you learn from their experience and you make sure that you're very cautious about how you manage the sorts of regional conflicts that we see playing out in the world today.
I mean, on that front, should the country be ready when they look at their military to have a very different looking armed forces going forwards, that actually fixating on the size of the armed forces, on this 82,000 strong army, is actually the wrong metric, and what you should be looking at is capability, increased use of autonomous weapons, increased use of cyber, of space, to be able to have maximum effect? Are we going to see a smaller armed forces, but a more powerful armed forces?
I think you're going to see an armed forces that's designed for the 2030s. I mean, you won't get there overnight, but that's the direction of travel. And we think that an armed forces designed for then is going to be one that is organised through the prism of the domains of land, air and maritime, but also cyber and space, because it's the way that you integrate all of those domains together these days and certainly into the future that gives you your disruptive edge. So I think you'll see armed forces that are designed to do that. And I think that absolutely means that we will have all manner of different people employed, because those domains require different skill sets. And we will absolutely avail ourselves of autonomous platforms and robotics wherever we can. But we don't yet know, and nobody can predict the future, quite what mix of technologies will be necessary to be able to achieve that. And that's why returning to the lost art of experimentation, something that perhaps we haven't done constructively since the 1930s, is something that we'll absolutely have to do.
If you see something, say something.